Have you ever been to somebody's house and you go into the restroom to wash your hands and they have just a bar of soap there? Sometimes it has like a straggly little body hair on there. I mean, how am I supposed to trust that strand of hair? For all I know, it came from their cheeks. I'm just saying, invest in a little bit of liquid hand soap. It's not the end of the world. That hand soap has probably been places that I can't even imagine. But anyways, all jokes aside, let's get straight into today's video because I have a little bit of a rant for you guys. This is something that I've been wanting to talk about, or I've started to notice over the past few months regarding DC collectibles or just action figures in general, but we're only going to focus a little bit more in on the DC side of things because, as we know, Mcfarlane is supposed to be losing the license in the next year, and I'm not really going to get into it because it's been beaten to death at this point. We know that he's supposed to be losing the DC license sometime in 2026, whether that's in the middle part of the year or towards the end of it. The rumors are all over the place, so we don't have an exact date of when he's supposed to lose the license, but we know that Mattel will be taking over right after. The interesting part about this, I think, has been the ramifications of a lot of these manufacturers overseas. Like, we didn't really see a lot of big manufacturers overseas try to take on the DC license because I think a lot of it had to do with McFarlane's weird scaling. Like, for the longest time, Mattel had the license for the DC action figure collectibles, and they had it at about that 6-inch scale to like 112 range. I know it kind of varies a little bit. It's essentially the same scale, but usually it's about like a centimeter or 2 centimeters off. And so they don't always look great next to each other. But I think in most cases, people actually mixed a lot of the overseas manufacturers together with their Mattel universe because it made sense. They were just slightly off. Aesthetically, I think they always look different, but in terms of scaling and size, which is something that collectors really look at, they didn't really vary too much, and so people were okay with it. And over the past, I would like to say about a year, a lot of overseas manufacturers have actually tried to dip their toes into manufacturing DC collectibles at that 6-inch to 112 scale. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that McFarlane is about to lose a license, or at least maybe it's now that I'm starting to pay attention to this and it kind of popped up on my radar. But I don't know, it just feels different. I'll give you guys an example. Gong Studios over the past, I think, like year or so, has released 3 separate DC collectibles. We have that giant thick Shazam action figure that they released. I think that was the first release. And they did the Kingdom Come Superman, which, by the way, looks amazing. I don't necessarily feel like it fits in too much with the source material, but it's still a really good looking action figure. And I love that giant, beefy, bulky body mold. They went with their own style. They went with what they feel like looks really good in a display. And I actually have to commend them for that, because usually a lot of these manufacturers either try to stick too close to the source material or they try to fit in with other displays. In this particular case, they just decided to do their own thing. They ran that character or that version of the character through their own filter, and it looks phenomenal. There's also the new Gong Studios Hush Batman, which again looks amazing. Wired cloth cape, a ton of different accessories, really good articulation scheme. If you guys go online, there are a ton of different videos covering this particular figure. But it just goes to show, like, I had never even heard of Gong Studios. Maybe they've been around for a while, but they only recently popped up on my radar. And that's how you know they're kind of starting to hit it a little bit mainstream within the action figure community. And I think that, again, ties back into the fact that McFarlane is about to lose the DC license, and these manufacturers are kind of circling around like vultures. They're ready to kind of stake their claim in the new era of collecting DC action figures. And I think a lot of it has to do with Mattel's new scale, because we know Mattel is not going to cater to the McFarlane collectors. They don't really care about that. They've always been a 6-inch manufacturer, so they're not going to turn around and try to manufacture collectibles at the McFarlane scale, which is the 1/10 to like 7-inch scale. So they're just not going to do that. They're going to go back to their main MO, which is the 6-inch line. They do a lot of it with almost any manufacturer that they've, or any collectible that they've manufactured in the past few years. They always veer closer to the 6-inch scale. So I think that's what they're going to do. And a lot of these overseas manufacturers are realizing that, and they're now trying to kind of cement their place in the collector community, because they feel like a lot of their collectibles could fit into that Mattel universe. They know that they're not going to be able to mass produce the way that Mattel does, so they're kind of aiming to fit into tiny little slots in those displays. And I think this is a prime example because Gong Studios is not going to release 30, 40 different figures on a yearly basis. From my calculations, over the, recently they've only released those 3 DC figures. If you want another prime example, what about InArt? Did InArt even exist a few years ago? I don't know. Like I said, they only recently popped up on my radar, but they just did the Dark Knight Rises Batman, the Christian Bale / Christopher Nolan version, and then they did the Anne Hathaway Catwoman. Both of those I think we'd already seen from McFarlane and a number of different manufacturers, so it made no sense for them to work on those characters, but I think it was a pretty good bet. I mean, they're trying to go back around. They're assuming that the Christian Bale that Mattel offers or the Anne Hathaway that Mattel offers maybe isn't going to be like everybody's prototypical vision. They're going to have to scale back a lot of things, and they feel like they could easily just be slotted into the Mattel universe. Maybe that's not what they're thinking. Maybe that's not their game plan, but that's the way that it appears to somebody that's, really paying attention to the DC universe. They also had the Arkham Origins InArt action figure, which looks absolutely amazing. And we know that a lot of these companies are really into video games right now. Everybody's doing the Arkham series. Everybody's doing like Marvel versus Capcom. Everybody's doing Mega Man stuff. Everybody's doing Street Fighter. And so it just makes sense for a lot of these manufacturers to circle back around and work on a lot of these video game characters. And then you have Mafex doing just a crazy ton of DC figures. If I'm not mistaken, they did a John Cena a few months ago. They did a Bloodsport action figure. I think they just reissued the Cyborg Superman, as well as the Hush Batman that they released a while back. I think they actually snuck in a Nightwing action figure in there as well. All of those are re-releases / reissues, and we've seen other manufacturers. I think the Justice League Wonder Woman was just reissued as well. So it just feels like all of these manufacturers are gaining a ton of confidence. They're gaining a little bit of traction, they're gaining momentum, and they're actually going to start manufacturing way more 1/12 scale action figures. And again, I think it all kind of ties back into Mattel gaining the license. This is going to be really interesting moving forward. I also really quickly wanted to talk about another little bit of news that I kind of caught on the back end over the weekend. And apparently Playmates is supposed to be losing the license for the TMNT action figure line. Now, I don't know exactly what particular spot of the TMNT universe they own, because I do see a lot of other manufacturers working on the TMNT universe. Now, I've said it before, I think they just completely oversaturated the market. Just off the bat, I know Mcfarlane just picked up a TMNT universe. And again, I know they all have different source materials. They all have different stylings. They're all based on different comic book series or different TV shows, so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's TMNT. Like, there's only so many different versions of the Ninja Turtles that people want in their display. As I mentioned, McFarlane already just recently picked up the license. We know that the Loyal Subjects had their TMNT line. I don't know if that's still ongoing, but they were manufacturing Ninja Turtle figures for a while. And then you have NECA manufacturing at about that 7-inch scale, along with Super 7. And then obviously you had Playmates doing their own stuff. So I do feel like they've reached their limit, and potentially maybe either it wasn't worth it to them, they don't feel like there's enough source material for them to continue picking at, or the license is just too expensive and they just can't justify the new price point. Not to mention, it could be McFarlane releasing his new TMNT line, and that's what broke the camel's back. I mean, because think about how many different manufacturers were already working on the line, and how now having a big heavy hitter like McFarlane swoop in and work on the line as well. I know they're all completely different scales, but they're still about that same, that same range. If you pick up a Ninja Turtle figure, they're all going to range from about like 5 inches to about 7 inches. So it's not like a huge difference. So it's just something to keep an eye on. We could see another manufacturer pick up the license, whether it's maybe some of these other, I mean, there's Jazzwares out there that hasn't really done anything too big recently, maybe Hasbro. We know McFarlane is already working on a line, but maybe because Playmates just lost the license, maybe they actually swoop in and pick up the license at a slightly bigger scale, maybe closer to the DC Multiverse, or maybe at that 6-inch scale, which I think is what Playmates usually played around with. So I don't know. This is going to be really interesting moving forward. There are a ton of different manufacturers out there that I think could pick up the license, or maybe they've already picked up on the hints that there are way too many manufacturers working on the TMNT line, and maybe this is it. Maybe whoever is manufacturing TMNT collectibles, that's all we're going to get for the foreseeable future. It's going to be really interesting moving forward. I only dabble when it comes down to TMNT collectibles. I don't have a ton of them, but it's just really interesting to see all of this playing out. There are licenses, I think, that will pass on to other manufacturers, and I think it's going to be very interesting and very difficult to follow, just because there might be people that were huge diehard Playmates fans who may not be willing to, cross over to other manufacturers. But I'm very curious to see what everybody has to say. Let me know your thoughts down below. Are you guys interested in collecting anything aside from Playmates, or are you going down with its ship? Similar to Mcfarlane, are you, preparing yourself for Mattel, or are you done with DC Collectibles once Mcfarlane loses the license? Very curious to see what everybody has to say. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure to stay tuned. We upload pretty consistently. We're doing it on a daily basis. We absolutely love it, and hopefully you guys enjoy it just as much. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the hobby. Pose your action figures. Play around with them, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.